queried, and he made Malacca profitable once more by increasing trade and reintroducing the amended Dutch licenses or monopolies on the sale of goods and produce. However, there was one which he refused to reintroduce, the cockfighting licence. Farquhar deplored that sport. He was also opposed to the slave trade, and after that was declared a felony in British settlements, he promptly closed any loopholes when he saw that the regulations were being evaded. Farquhar was not afraid to speak his mind. In 1806, when asked about Malacca's future, he composed an eloquent memorandum arguing that Malacca's fort should not be destroyed and that the town should not be evacuated. However, London had determined on destruction, and when Farquhar received orders to proceed with this, he made another appeal, but this time he was curtly reprimanded. When demolition was nearly complete, Raffles, who happened to be the secretary at Penang at the time, wrote to Lord Minto, the new governor in India, urging him not to evacuate the population. Raffles had in fact plagiarised Farquhar's earlier emotive words, and while Raffles' letter is quoted as proof of his statesmanship, Farquhar's memo is largely forgotten. Farquhar greatly assisted Raffles to collect intelligence on Java for the impending British invasion in 1811. He took part in that and was offered the post of resident at Yogyakarta. He declined, choosing to return to Malacca to his de facto wife, Nadia and their 5 children. After Napoleon was defeated in 1815, the British knew that they would have to return Malacca to the Dutch. Farquhar wrote another compelling memo, hoping Malacca might be retained. Also, the Penang merchants, whose trade had expanded during the British occupation, were worried that their inroads into the trade in the Eastern Archipelago might be curtailed once the Dutch returned. They and Farquhar pressed Colonel Bannerman, the Lieutenant Governor of Penang, to take action. Bannerman sent Farquhar on a diplomatic mission, and in August 1818 he secured a trade treaty with Sultan Abdul Rahman of Johor, and this gave Britain most favoured nation status and trade monopolies. But Farquhar knew that something more substantial than a commercial trade treaty was needed to protect British interests. He had earlier advocated founding a new base south of Malacca on the Karaman Islands, but Bannerman prevaricated. So Farquhar wrote to Raja Muda, who was the effective ruler of the Johor Empire, who agreed to a British survey, provided he could first speak to Farquhar. Bannerman relayed that information to Hastings. Now Hastings was further pressured by the Calcutta merchants and Raffles, who had arrived on that city, to take some action. And Hastings agreed to build on the strong footing obtained by Farquhar's treaty. So he sent Raffles on a twofold mission. First, he was to settle a dynastic dispute in Aceh. Then, he was to establish a new post in Rio. Hastings appointed Farquhar to take charge of the new post, but he was to be subordinate to Raffles, who was in Bencoolen. The two men met up in Penang, and on the 19th of January, they set sail for the Caramons. As they proved unsuitable, Farquhar suggested Singapore. Raffles and Farquhar stepped ashore at Singapore on the 28th of January. Raffles, who had recently contemplated Singapore as an option, realised it was an ideal spot. And this is one of the earliest images we have of Singapore, taken in February 1819. But there was a problem. The island formed part of the Johor Empire, which was controlled by the Dutch. Raffles got around that by illegally installing Tunku Long, the brother of the real Sultan, as the new Sultan of Johor. He then claimed that his Sultan was independent, as he had signed no treaties with the Dutch. Raffles then signed a treaty with his new Sultan and the Temenggung, and this allowed the East India Company to lease a small piece of land for a trading post. And that's the extent of the British settlement from Tanjong Katong down to Tanjong Malang. It's only about 3 miles and 1 mile inland. After drawing up some general instructions, Raffles departed for Penang. Now it's important to note that Raffles did not purchase the island or acquire it. Indeed, acquisition was far from guaranteed. The Dutch were furious at Raffles' actions. Diplomatic protests began, and reports were received that they would retake the post by force. Bannerman urged Farquhar to withdraw before blood was shed. Farquhar refused to abandon the post, however, because he knew it was the East India Company's last chance to obtain a new base. Then the Sultan and the Temenggung had second thoughts. They wrote to the real Sultan and the Raja Muda, asking for forgiveness for having signed the treaty. They claimed that Raffles had coerced them into signing, and it was Farquhar who persuaded the nobles to retract those statements. Thus his actions in the initial few months ensured that the post remained in British hands, at least for the time being. Farquhar set about clearing the land and building infrastructure. He was creating the settlement from scratch, with limited manpower, few resources, and little money. The population grew rapidly as men from Malacca who knew and respected Farquhar flocked to Singapore